and all of its approach activities since then have gone extremely well. Again, a spectacular launch occurring Friday afternoon from the Cape Canaveral Air Force Station to send the Dragon on its two-day rendezvous to the International Space Station. The Dragon will actually remain attached to the Earth-facing port of the Harmony module until May 11th. That is its current departure date. It will bring home with it valuable scientific experiments and actual blood and urine samples that were taken during the journey of the one-year crew, points to optimize the lighting that would be available at the time of capture. Again, the original grapple time or capture time was 6 a.m. Central, 7 a.m. Eastern. We likely will be slightly behind that time. How much slightly behind we will be remains to be seen, but we'll keep you posted as we get a bit closer. Required by Dragon for its successful capture by the robotic arm officers Tim Pik and Jeff Uильямс, who are standing by in the cupola at the robotics workstation there. As the Dragon cargo craft grows larger in the field of view, as you can see here from a truss camera on the International Space Station, Flight Director Amit Kshatriya here in the flight control room in Houston is discussing with his flight controllers the final review of the flight rules that will ultimately lead to a go, no-go decision for Dragon's approach inside 30 meters. Dragon now just 85 meters away from the International Space Station, flying over the South Atlantic. Its approach continuing to go by the book, no issues whatsoever with the SpaceX cargo craft. Expected arrival at the 30-meter station keeping point, its final station keeping point, about 12.5 minutes from now. This is Mission Control Houston. As you look at the International Space Station Flight Control Room here in Houston, the team under the direction of Flight Director Amit Kshatriya at the moment, as we stand by for a final go for approach to the capture point for the Dragon cargo craft. The robotic arm under the control of European Space Agency astronaut Tim Pik is in motion. Pik, the prime robotics officer for the capture of the SpaceX cargo craft this morning, backed up by NASA flight engineer Джефф Уильямс. Expedition 47 Commander Tim Copra is monitoring Dragon's systems during the terminal phase of this rendezvous. That began with the launch of Dragon from the Cape Canaveral Air Force Station in Florida on Friday afternoon. Dragon and the station just 30 meters apart from one another, currently flying 250 statute miles over southern Iran. The robotics officer in mission control here reports that the arm is in the so-called high hover position, which puts it at the correct point for Dragon to resume its approach inside 30 meters.
The arm in the high hover position. So when you guys are ready, we can send the command to resume approach.
And Houston, SSRMS is in the high hover position. We go to business.
And Jeff, that was a little broken. Can you repeat, please?
Yeah, station, we concur. SSRMS is in the high hover position.
Spacecraft communicator Serena Anand here in Mission Control, communicating with Jeff Uильямс, just ensuring that the robotic arm is in the right configuration before the approval is given formally to resume final approach for capture. Just waiting for the crew to report that everything is in readiness in the cupola at the robotics workstation.
But when you're done with step 3.3, the capture briefing, just let us know.
A couple of the external cameras are being reconfigured. Aboard the International Space Station, Pik, Uильямс, and Copra are in a final internal tag-up in the cupola to make sure that they're at the ready for the capture of Dragon before it resumes its approach on commanding from the SpaceX Mission Control Team in Hawthorne, California. There's a view of the SpaceX control room on this Sunday morning. Everything since launch has gone perfectly for the Dragon cargo craft, which is arriving at the station today to deliver 3.5 tons of supplies and experiments. That includes the Bigelow Expandable Activity Module, the beam that will be extracted from the trunk of Dragon next Saturday morning in the wee hours and installed to the aft port of the Tranquility Module. This animated depiction shows the work that will be done next Saturday morning, April 16th, as beam is extracted from the trunk of Dragon and under the control of the robotics officer here in Mission Control, maneuvered to the aft port of Tranquility, where it will be installed and bolted into place for a 2-year stay to test the prototypical use of expandable habitats for deep space exploration. Flight Director Amit Kshatriya here in Mission Control has told his counterpart in Hawthorne, Paul Tompkins of SpaceX,
Dragon is ready to proceed to the capture point. Expect approach to resume shortly.
Station copies.
All parties are now go for final approach. The command to be issued momentarily by the SpaceX flight control team. We should be regaining our downlink television capability from the International Space Station a couple of minutes from now. Everything continuing to go very smoothly. All of Dragon's systems are in excellent shape. And Dragon now is on final approach. Dragon is expected to arrive at its capture point about 16 minutes from now. At that time, the flight control team here in Houston will give a final go for capture, at which point Tim Pik, with the assistance of Джефф Уильямс and the cupola at the robotics workstation, will begin to extend the Canadarm2 robotics arm towards the grapple fixture of Dragon, affixing the snares to that grapple fixture to complete the 36-hour journey for Dragon from the launch pad at Cape Canaveral to the International Space Station.
Station Houston on 2, Dragon has begun approach from 30 meters. Your go to monitor per step 5 in 1.102.
Station copies, monitoring per step 5.
And the final approach call from Capcom Serena Anand here in Mission Control as the International Space Station and Dragon fly 250 statute miles over northwest China. Standing by for a reacquisition of our downlink television capability from the International Space Station.
Houston Station Space Route 2, we see approach mode at 27 meters and closing, and Block B is good.
Copy.
And just to complete the record, I can verify LEDs.
Copy.
Excellent view of Dragon at about the 24-meter point. Currently flying over the border between China and Mongolia. The expectation is that capture will be accomplished before we go into an orbital sunset, However, if the current approach of Dragon does not permit a grapple within the daylight lighting condition capability, we'll simply sit tight and wait for the next daylight opportunity at the next orbital sunrise. There is no rush here, no time constraint to actual grapple of Dragon. We are about 9 minutes away from moving into an orbital sunset, with the next orbital sunrise not expected until about 6:46 a.m. Central Time. So once again, we'll stand by and see the current rate of Dragon's approach and whether the crew is comfortable with a grapple of Dragon either at or near orbital sunset. "24 meters separating Dragon from the International Space Station. A good view from the end effector camera on Canadarm2. At the very bottom of Dragon, out of the field of view at the moment, is the Bigelow Expandable Activity Module, the beam, that will be extracted by this same robotic arm next Saturday morning in the wee hours by the robotics officer here in Mission Control and maneuvered to a position for installation on the aft port of the Tranquility module. Dragon will be parked at the Earth-facing port of the Harmony module in a parking space right next to the orbital ATK Cygnus cargo craft that arrived at the station back on March 26th, 2 weeks ago. These two U.S. commercial cargo craft arriving at the station sandwiched around the Russian resupply craft, the ISS Progress 63, that automatically docked to the aft port of the Zvezda service module 8 days ago. As mentioned earlier, but worth noting once again, once Dragon is attached to the Earth-facing port of Harmony later this morning, it will mark only the second time in station history that 6 vehicles will be at the station at the same time, the only other time being the STS-133 mission, the final flight of the shuttle Discovery back in 2011.
Сегодня все на английском языке что записывается.
currently approaching an orbital sunset. There is margin, however, for the crew to continue to proceed on with the capture of Dragon for several minutes after orbital sunset. This will be a crew-dependent comfort factor that they'll be determining on their own as we get a bit closer to the capture time itself. We're about 6 minutes away from capture point. The Dragon just 18 meters away. Tim Pik and Jeff Uильямс are at the controls of the station's robotic arm, the Canadarm2. They're working from the cupola at the robotics workstation. Tim Pik and Expedition 47 Commander Tim Kopra, along with Russian cosmonaut Yuri Malenchenko in their 118th day in space. Jeff Uильямс backing up Tim Pik for this robotic capture of Dragon that will occur a short time from now, beginning his fourth week aboard the International Space Station along with cosmonauts Alexei Ovchinin and Alex Gorpochka. The three cosmonauts are gearing up for a significant holiday on Tuesday of this week, April 12th, which is the 55th anniversary of the launch of Yuri Gagarin as the first human to fly in space, Cosmonautics Day to be observed aboard the International Space Station. But first things first, as the station and Dragon pass over the northern islands of Japan, moving from northwest to southeast. The Dragon cargo craft launched on Friday afternoon from the Cape Canaveral Air Force Station in Florida aboard the SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket, entered its preliminary orbit about 10 minutes after launch, deployed its solar arrays, and began the trek toward the International Space Station that will culminate soon with its capture by European Space Agency astronaut Tim Pik using the Canadarm2 robotic arm. Dragon about 13 meters away from the station.
In Houston Station on 2, FYI, we have commanded the strobe off.
We concur. Good idea. Thank you.
A good view of the grapple fixture that the robotic arm will attach itself to, and at the very top of the Dragon is the passive common berthing mechanism that will be mated to the active common berthing mechanism on the Earth-facing side of the Harmony module following capture and the robotic maneuver of the spacecraft to its installation position later today. And the Canadarm2 now in motion toward the grapple fixture of Dragon. Dragon very stable. The International Space Station will be put in free drift with no thruster firing capability at the time of capture to ensure that no perturbations are placed on the Dragon spacecraft at the time that the snares on the end effector of the Canadarm2 grapple onto the grapple fixture itself.